What's up, you guys, and welcome back to Kingdom Culture, where we are helping God's people to keep the course in an opposing world. Today's conversation is one about service, but more specifically, how we can serve like Jesus. And so I think it's kind of humbling to realize that all of us at some point in our lives have been selfish or acted selfishly or done something selfish. And so the first thing that we have to do in order to shift ourselves into a place of service like Jesus did is that we have to first shift our mindset of one of selfishness to one of selflessness. And so it's important to know that our thoughts directly impact and directly affect our life, and our mindset actually has a lot of power over us. And so, research actually shows that our mindset can play a significant role in determining our life's outcomes. And so, just as an example, if I truly think in my mind that I am useless or that I'm not good at anything or that I won't amount to anything, then I am going to only take steps that will encourage that thought process, because your life is kind of like a pipeline process. Every action causes a reaction that changes something about your life. And so it's kind of like the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is this sensitive dependence on initial conditions in which a small change in one state of a deterministic nonlinear system can result in large differences in a later state. And so in very simple terms, it's the idea that our small choices have large results. And so our choices are a result of the decisions that we make. And, we make way more decisions on a daily basis than we even realize. The average person actually makes an estimated 35,000 choices daily, right? That's crazy. And so the decisions that we make can be as small as what time you're going to leave your house for school, what time you're going to eat breakfast, what time you're going to go to bed, what time you're going to who you're going to talk to, anything like that. But as small as these decisions may seem, each of these choices have effects that later will become evident. But every single one of these actions begin at the same place, and these are with a thought. They begin with our mindset. And so, just as an example, let's say my lifelong dream is to become a doctor, but I'm stuck in a mindset that tells me I'm not smart enough. So I'm going to be stuck there. I'll never challenge myself to take harder classes. I'll never do research on areas I would excel in. I'll never pursue medical school, and I'll never work hard to accomplish this dream. All because I allowed my mindset to determine my future rather than taking hold of my circumstances and shifting my mindset. And so in order for us to change our lives, we first have to shift our mindset. And we have to make a redirection from the path that we are now on in order to be effective. And so here's a quick story. I used to live 30 minutes away from my place of work. I lived all the way at the beach, and I was in a beach town, and my work was about 30 minutes away. And so every single day that I would go to work, I would wake up early enough and get ready early enough that I had the time to drive 30 minutes to work every single day. And I had a specific route that I had been going every single day, and I was planning on going. And one day I was riding in the car with my husband, and he was like, if you go this way, you'll take a couple of minutes off your trip. And I was like, no, I've always gone this way. This is the fastest route. This is the way the GPS takes me. And he was like, no, I'm telling you, this way is quicker. And I was like, okay, you know what? Let's see who's wrong. We're kind of competitive. So I was like, what? I'll try it and I'll see it, and you'll be wrong. And, I go his way, and actually his way was shorter. But before I was willing to try his method, I had actually already predetermined in my mind that my way was better. And we've gotten in a habit of kind of doing the same thing with Jesus and living these unfulfilling lives because we think that our way is better than the direction that Jesus is pointing us in. And so just like I had to kind of be willing to accept some redirection and try a new route, sometimes our lives need redirecting in order to make them better. And so there's a key phrase that I'm going to talk about. And when I first say it, you're probably going to be confused. You're going to be like, what does that even mean? But it will make sense in the end. And the key phrase that I want you to make note of is that the only way up is down. And so we're going to get into what that means. The only way up is down. And so the only way to have a life that you love to live is to be prepared to live it humbly. Because if you love to and you live to be celebrated, you will die when you do not get validated. And, when we're living for the world, or we're living for people's approval, or always needing to be recognized, we're never going to be satisfied. We're never going to be happy with our lives, because we're not always going to receive the approval that we want from other people. And, God has already seen you and loves you and is proud of and is also validating you. And so something that we have to do in this mindset is to shift it. And so we can look at an example of selflessness shown by Jesus in John 13. It says, "It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. This evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him." And so what we see here is this image of Jesus beginning to wash the feet of the disciples who were around him. And so I want to highlight something here that is so symbolic is, we've heard this story plenty of times about Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, and it's kind of become like one of these Sunday school Bible stories that we just talk about and we don't think much about it. But, something that we know is that people's feet stink. People's feet be smelling bad, and we all have that friend. We all have that one person who, but something that you need to know is that in Jesus' time, the washing of feet was actually symbolic, and it wasn't a matter of people's feet just stinking because they forgot to wear socks, or they're smelling bad because they were running and had been sweaty. But, in the time of Jesus and the disciples, people wore sandals. People were not wearing shoes that were protective from the mess and the dirt of the world around them. These were the feet of men who spent their lives traveling on foot and probably acquired a lot of germs and dirt and other disgusting things on their feet by the end of the day. And their feet were not protected by shoes like ours are today. And so there's a significance here that I'm referencing, is that Jesus lowered himself to wash something that was considered unclean with his bare hands, while he, being one with God, was clean. And so even more than this, Jesus physically and literally lowered himself. Jesus was born to be the king and the creator above all people, and he was literally made to be higher than us, yet he lowered himself to be less than the disciples to wash their feet. And so why does he do this? It continues and it says, "He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, 'Lord, are you going to wash my feet?' Jesus replied, 'You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand.' 'No,' said Peter, you shall never wash my feet.' Jesus answered, 'Unless I wash you, you have no part with me.' 'Then, Lord,' Simon Peter replied, 'just not my feet, but my hands and my head as well.' Jesus answered, 'Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you.' For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes, returned to his place. 'Do you understand what I have done for you?' he asked them. 'You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." And so Jesus is practicing this very message that we're talking about, that the only way up is actually down. And so, there's this whole group of James and John and Zebedee who are asking Jesus at a certain point in scripture to basically promote them to become second and third in command. And, their mom is having this conversation with Jesus. But what we see here is that Jesus is making an example of the fact that the way up is not always up. And so, whenever people ask me questions or talk to me about the Bible, I usually get two kinds of people. I sometimes get people who are genuinely curious and want to know more, and they're interested and looking to grow, and they have a trait that I admire, and that's teachability. And then there's another type of person, and this type of person always knows the answers. They don't really want to hear what you have to say. They're just talking to talk, and they think that they've already learned all that there is to learn, and that they're just going to get you told. And so, obviously out of the two types of people, there's one that I'm going to be more willing to talk to and enjoy more being willing to talk to. And that's the first, because teachability is saying, I am not above learning new things. And so it's humility, setting aside your pride and having a willing spirit. And this is actually a characteristic that we see of Jesus. So, in regards of shifting our mindset to one of service, we have to stop looking at church and people and community for what they can do for us, but rather start looking at what it is that we can do for others. And so we see this in Jesus' example, and it's so clear and it's so powerful because it's a mindset that we don't want to be in. I think the culture actually teaches us that to be lower or to be a person that is a servant, that it's embarrassing or that it's lowly and it's something that we shouldn't want to be. But actually Jesus, who did not need the approval of people, did not care to have the approval of people, chose to be less than, chose to be a servant. And it shows that there's a lot of depth in doing that. There's a lot of depth in having that as characteristic. And so, we have to view serving the same way that Jesus did, and that's with eagerness and with a willing spirit. Because it would have been very easy for Jesus, being Jesus, to be like, oh, I don't need to do that for people. I don't need to put myself in a position of service. I don't need to be lower than anyone because he's Jesus. He doesn't need that, right? He's the Son of God. But he chose to because he was fully God, yet simultaneously fully man. And he chose to set an example for believers in faith in us and what we should be doing by what he was doing. And so what we can't do as Christians is see ourselves as above serving others. We have to be willing to serve other people because, like we see, the only way up is down, right? And so as a Christian, if I want to be like Jesus, then I cannot be unwilling to do the very things that Jesus did for others, right? And especially I think in the context that applies to me, and I would encourage you guys to look at how this applies to you in your context. I work with students on a consistent basis. And in our church, we encourage all of our students to serve. We encourage our students to serve in any ministry, any team that they can. And so it would not be fruitful for me to encourage my students to serve on teams, encourage my students to serve other people if I'm not also serving, right? Because it's inconsistent. And it's the same thing that we see as Christians with Jesus is Jesus gave us a prime example of something that we are called to and something that we need to do as Christians. And if we are unwilling to do so, follow someone who held himself to that same standard, then we're not only unwilling, we're being prideful, we're being selfish, and we're not following in the footsteps that we were supposed to or that we've been called to. And we can't adequately follow Jesus if we're unwilling to do some of the most basic things that Jesus did. And so the last thing that I want to talk about is, service in church is incredibly important. And my church does a great job of creating a culture with people of service that does not feel like an obligation or a task. And so, people that serve at our church, they call them world changers, and that's exactly what they are, because that's exactly what they're doing. But they have cultivated such a culture where people come in and it's not a duty or a job or another thing added onto their plate, but it's a joy and it's an honor to be able to serve other people, because we see that that was what Jesus did, and we are getting to hold hands with and walk with and carry the same characteristics that Jesus did. And that's an honor. That's not something that's a burden or something to be embarrassed about or something that we should be neglectful of. It's something that we should be proud of, and we are. And I think that if everyone carried that same mindset or carried the fact that it was an honor to be able to serve God's people like God did, that everyone's mindset would shift. And I think that's important and that they should. And so I hope that this conversation opens some doors or opened your eyes a little bit about service and serving like Jesus and why it's such an important thing, because it absolutely is. And I think that if more people had a mindset of service, and especially service like Jesus, it would crazily shift our culture. It would be dynamic. And so I hope that you guys can see this and also open your mind and open your heart a little bit to service wherever it is you're at. If it's in your church or your community or with your family or wherever it looks like, that you can open yourself up to shifting the culture around you by service. And I'm not saying you have to wash people's feet, but you can do this by anything that requires you to become lower so that you can empower other people, so that God can later raise you up. And so I hope that you guys take something away from this. And as a real quick closer, make sure that you guys are connected all across the board, following this channel so that you will see everything, not just this podcast, but there are plenty of other resources on this channel, renew.org. So make sure that you are following it, because you will see all kind of great tools and resources that you need. Also, please make sure that you are following on Instagram, the Renew Network, the Kingdom Culture Podcast, and me at The Reagan Grace. So thank you for tuning in, and we will catch up with you next week on the Kingdom Culture Podcast. Until then, be blessed.